In this presentation, we're going to meet the main protagonists of the School of Athens, Plato and Aristotle, and we're going to see their impact or their propagation outward in two essentially divergent schools of thought. And remember, the idea here is that probably inspiring Raphael were advisors at the papal court, maybe the librarian Ingirami, maybe the great preacher of the Vatican, Giles of Viterbo, maybe the Pope himself. We're interested in one way or another in the reconciliation of Plato and Aristotle. So even though we're going to find divergent schools of thought, the idea is ultimately that somehow this is all reconcilable. Now, the School of Athens, as we've seen, is a composition in space with philosophers doing philosophical things, debating, instructing, writing, reading, or solitary meditation in some cases. The structure of this thing is really about the kind of split that happens about the central axis, about the space between the two figures of Plato and Aristotle, where we found the vanishing point. On one side, with Plato, there are a series of philosophers that may be thought to have more to do with Plato perhaps than Aristotle in a certain sense. So to his left, at the same level, dressed in olive drab and a rather unattractive character counting off on his fingers, is Socrates. So obviously Plato effectively is how we know much about, if anything, about Socrates. He is essentially the voice of Socrates. Below them is a group that we will look at again and is organized around a figure writing in a book that we saw in the cartoon, and that is the figure of Pythagoras, Pythagoras being a predecessor of Plato. So one of the things to keep in mind in this fresco is that people are not arranged in a sense chronologically. It's not as if you move from a more ancient time to a more modern time. Down below, especially the level of Plato and Aristotle on the ground, you'll find people from a variety of centuries, both before and after the birth of Christ. So on that side, on the left, we have the group organized more or less around the figure of Pythagoras. And on the right side, we have a group down at the ground organized more or less around a figure of Euclid. That figure of Euclid, by the way, anecdotally, is supposed to be his head is based on the figure of Bramante, the actual architect Donato Bramante, who was at that time designing the Vatican Palace, the Villa Belvedere, and also the new St. Peter's for Pope Julius II, and is the person who was primarily responsible for Julius II inviting Raphael to Rome, since they were essentially compatriots from the Marche region. Above the School of Athens is a roundel with a figure representing a kind of an allegory of the idea of philosophy. And she's flanked by cherubs that hold up two signs that say causarum cognitio, which basically means the knowledge of things, or the causes of things. So you're interested in the knowledge of causes, or the understanding of causes. And what essentially Raphael is saying is that's what philosophy is about, is coming to grips with understanding why things are the way they are. And for that, we have the two gestures of Plato and Aristotle, Plato pointing up to the kind of ideal, the perfect forms from which all reality is derived, and Aristotle pointing out to the world itself, from which we essentially inductively arrive at knowledge and understanding of the nature of the world. And again, on the left, we have Pythagoras. He is writing in a book. He's not particularly interested in engaging with anyone else. The people around him are sort of cheating, looking over his shoulder, peering into what he's writing. But he's not particularly interested in, even though this is known as a school, in doing very much teaching. Behind him, above his shoulder, dressed in green, is the Islamic philosopher Averroes, who is a great advocate, in fact, of Aristotle in the Middle Ages, and a great conveyor, in a way, of Aristotelian knowledge to the West. The figure dressed in white, the rather ghostly, ethereal, lovely figure dressed in white, may very well be the only female figure in the painting. May very well be Hypatia, who was a Neoplatonist mathematician, philosopher, connected with Alexandria, a couple of centuries after the birth of Christ. On the right, we have the figure of Euclid, again, probably Bramante, drawing a geometric figure, maybe even one that would describe the plan of a building. And he is very much teaching. He's very much surrounded by active, engaged students doing things that students should be doing, looking attentively, listening, explaining to their fellow students. It is a kind of model in a way of what education is all about. And in that sense, Raphael, I think, sees himself in Bramante because, in fact, Raphael becomes one of the great teachers of art and himself sponsors a school of painting and architectural design and even to a certain extent sculpture that really defines a major current of Western culture for centuries.